Hello, you've tuned to this week's episode of Next Steps Forward, and I'm your host, Chris Meek. As always, it's an honor to have you with us. Next Steps Forward is committed to helping others achieve more than ever while experiencing greater personal empowerment and well-being. My special guest today is Dr. Arash Javanbakht. Dr. Javanbakht is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and nationally recognized expert on anxiety, trauma, and post-traumatic stress. He is an associate professor of psychiatry at Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit, and he serves as the director of the university's Stress, Trauma, and Anxiety Research Clinic. Dr. Javanbakhtt's clinical work focuses on treating civilians, refugees, first responders, and victims of torture and human trafficking experiencing post-traumatic stress and trauma-related disorders. He's also the author of the book, Afraid: Understanding the Purpose of Fear and Harnessing the Power of Anxiety. Today, we'll explore what fear, stress, and anxiety do to the brain, how trauma reshapes us, and most importantly, how we can move forward with greater resilience, clarity, and control. Dr. Arash Javanbakht, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
It's an honor to have you here, sir. So thanks for your time. We're going to dive right in. Isn't fear just a part of everyday life we all deal with at one time or another? Why study fear?
I mean, to understand humans or any other biological being, we need to understand fear because it's a very integral core aspect of our existence. And it runs a lot of our behaviors. Just look at the world these days. We are afraid of so many things, from concrete things like, a car that may be passing by very fast, to the political, existential, geopolitical, economic, job, career kinds of fear. So fear is everywhere, and we are very strongly primed to be afraid because those of us who were not able to be afraid are not around anymore. Basically, as we were evolving like other animals, the ones who were capable of having this response were capable of surviving. And now, so part is understanding a big important aspect of my being, from emotional to cognitive and existential Arash that I am. The other part is to understand the diseases and disorders of fear, because these are very, very common conditions affecting a lot of us, affecting our functioning, affecting our ability to enjoy life. That's why we study fear.
And was there a defining moment that set you on your path to study fear and anxiety?
I mean, the funniest moment, I actually talk in my book about it, then my first encounter with fear that I recall was when I climbed up a ladder. I was at like, I think 10, 12 years old. I went up a ladder in my mom had this construction building, and we went up there, and she walked down first to be ready for me to walk down. And as I look down, it's just one floor. I'm terrified. And I realized for the first time in my life that I'm afraid of heights. And yeah, that was my first encounter with intense fear, and seeing how another human's kind and supportive presence can help me navigate through that experience and also be able to do it while afraid.
And how are fear and anxiety different?
So I want to go back a little bit to, I always, when I teach fear and anxiety, I say to understand fear and anxiety, we got to understand the context within which it evolved, right? So my system has fear to protect me. First thing, my existence, then mine, my people, and my belongings. And it goes back very far ago. The majority of the threats were physical. We didn't have an email coming us with a message that could make us worried about a career or about family and relatives. It was either somebody else attacking me, somebody else, or a predator attacking, or a rock falling. So the system was there to react very fast, didn't need much of logic, and it had to be mostly physical. So that's fear. And why it's around, because we had to survive, and it would be okay for it to go wrong sometimes. False alarms were okay, because it's okay for me to run 10 times rather than not run that one time that there's a real predator behind the bushes when I see the motions. Now, fear is when I see the predator. Fear is when somebody's pointing a gun at me. Fear is when the danger is right in front of me and I can identify it and I know what it is. Anxiety is a little bit more vague, and more of a sense of apprehension when I'm expecting something wrong to happen. For example, I walk out of the house and my neighbor tells me that, well, I read in the news that in this area there is a gunman on the loose. So now I go on a high state of alert. Or let's say a soldier, they're patrolling and they've heard there are some challenges in the area. They don't see anyone, but they are on high state of alert, and there is high heart rate is higher, arousal is higher, attention is focused. That's anxiety, more pervasive and less focused.
It seems like more people than ever are coping with anxiety. Are we living in a uniquely anxious era? Is there less of a stigma attached to the anxiety? And do people just feel compelled to share everything about themselves these days? Or are there some other factors in play?
I think it's a combination of a lot of factors. You said it very beautifully. One is that we are more comfortable sharing our anxieties, our worries, or any other mental challenges we have. Because, I don't know, 50 years ago, you say, I'm scared or I have anxiety, and they would be like, what are you talking about? Why are you ill? Why are you anxious? Don't be anxious. I think the other part is also media and social media, where there is, we can talk about it more so later, how media and social media are basically exaggerating the most emotional content. And among that most emotional content is fear, anxiety, and anger related content. So we see a lot more of it. Of course, we also are living in a very weird and unpredictable world these days, where a lot of things are unpredictable and go wrong, whether as a person or as a nation or as a species of humans, when we look at what's going on in the world and the news we are exposed to. And of course, exposure, again, because of the same reason I mentioned, is more fear driven. For example, there are a lot of things happening in this world which are good, which are fun, which are promising, but when you open your TV, most of what you hear is about the worst of what is happening. Now, are we more anxious than before? That's a very difficult question to answer, because I haven't been there then. But I suspect, and I have a theory, that some of our anxieties are because the system is confused. As I said, the system was very concrete. It was designed to understand what is objectively a physical threat to me and around me. Now, in this era, a lot of those fears and anxieties are abstract. For example, my system is not designed to comprehend what it means for an invisible pathogen coming from China and spreading through the world, right? And then hearing that, okay, these are the things you should or should not do to protect yourself against this illness, leads to anxiety. At the same time, a lot of us who are more fortunate are not exposed to traditional types of fear. For example, if you're living in America, it is very rare that your life is in danger and there's a physical threat or somebody attacking you. And the system doesn't get the stimuli it needs. And it gets confused. And I think a lot of our false alarms are because we cannot put things in perspective. For example, I can use an example. When I was with fear of heights, the first time I was in Grand Canyon, I'm looking at the bottom and I'm terrified. In that moment, what I see at the bottom is my death, right? That's a true, real, feasible danger. If I step one more or a few more steps forward, I'm dead. Now I come out of that experience and I open that email that is a little bit uncomfortable. Now my brain knows what is real danger. Now that gets easier. So a lot of us don't get exposure to real danger. And that is why, although when we talk about trauma, we talk about how it can break people, we also talk about how it can make people resilient, people who have had tough experience, whether veterans or first responders or other people. A lot of them are less easily shaken than the rest of us with ordinary day-to-day anxieties.
I can relate to your fear of heights. A few years ago, some friends of ours, we went on vacation to go hiking in Utah, and we went to the Arches.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't know what to expect. And you're climbing up, and I literally felt like gravity was pulling me over to the side. And then when you get to the top, where the famous arch is, the way that the stone is shaped, it actually looks like a big toilet bowl. And I felt like I was being sucked into the middle. So I literally just sat there frozen. I'm like, you guys go over there. Like, I'm going to be here, and when we're done, so I can completely relate to that. And I understand. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to go back to your comment about anxiety and social media. So you talked about how people are more open and talking about anxiety and mental health because of social media. And I've been saying for a few years now that the one positive thing to come out of COVID is that people have been more open about talking about mental health and anxiety. But do you think because we're in the 24/7 news cycle and the social media is always there and we're always doom scrolling with our thumbs, that what people see makes them more anxious?
So I can see a couple of mechanisms here. One is that we are not, when I'm spending 8 hours on my social media, I'm not having normal life of a human the way I was designed to live. I don't go out, I don't get exposure to sunlight, I don't talk to my neighbor, I don't exercise, the things that would be needed for my system to be in equilibrium and homeostasis. That's one part. But the other part is the social media algorithms are designed for maximum engagement. At the end of the day, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all of those are businesses that need revenue. And for revenue, the maximum engagement is what matters. I've turned to a finger that creates revenue for them. Now, so there's no malicious intention, I assume, but then the algorithms have learned what triggers emotions is more attractive, which is understandable, right? If something has an emotional balance and value for us, we are more attracted to it. We pay more attention to it. Now, negative emotions are more powerful in that. And that's why social media exaggerate exposure to the negative, whether it's fear, anxiety, or anger related, and our attention gets more attracted to it. And the more of anxious, scary things I see, now the algorithm perceives that as my point of interest and shows me more of that. And now I am scared, and my attention, when we are scared, our attention focuses on danger. Going back to that soldier on the field patrolling, they don't look for beautiful flowers. They don't even see the beautiful flowers, right? They see what could be dangerous. They see a little bit of motion out there that could be a threat. So now, same for me. My attention is now hyper focused on what can be dangerous, whether it's in my interaction with the world or is it with the social media. And I get more and more of that, and I get more and more scared and more exhausted. I don't need to prove this, because the same applies to, let's say, cable news. No matter which one you're watching, you watch for 1 hour, you leave thinking the whole world is going down in flames. You don't, even if there is a snippet of good news, there's always a but coming after it. And our perception, unfortunately, has become of these digital and virtual outlets and information. Because in reality, if I walk back to my real life in Ann Arbor, I run into my neighbor smiles, and we chat and we talk. It doesn't matter what political background we are from, because on social media, we're yelling at each other, right? I come back, me and my neighbor don't even ask what's my political view. We smile and talk about our lawn, and I go to the gym and I go to the store and people are smiling. So if I am living the real non-virtual life, I would be less scared.
Would you share the definitions of stress, trauma, and post-traumatic stress and how to recognize them? And second, are each of them points along a spectrum, or are they fundamentally different categories?
Very, very good question, especially about the spectrum, because we sometimes do have a dichotomous view. So stress is day-to-day challenges. What is not very easy? Like right now, I am stressed because I am a high cognitive task of having this conversation with you, right? Well, I've done a lot of these conversations. Let's say this was my third podcast. It would be also stressful. It's good because that stress brings me to a level of arousal and attention that I need to perform well. If I'm too bored, if I'm too relaxed, I won't be fully engaged in this conversation. But at the same time, if I'm too stressed, then I'm so nervous, my heart is pounding that I cannot focus on our conversation. So that's stress, and that is very common in life. Of course, we need some normal level of it. We can never have a stress-free life unless you're Buddha. But sometimes stress is too much, right? Then we have trauma, which is basically an event. Trauma is an experience. The way unfortunately, these days on social media, everybody is talking about trauma. Oh, I had a difficult conversation with my mom and it was traumatic. It was stressful. It was not traumatic. When we talk about trauma in psychiatry, we talk about experiences which could be seriously detrimental on my physical and sexual being and existence. We are talking about war, we are talking about shooting, domestic abuse, violence, serious motor vehicle accidents, assault, rape, robbery, explosions, terrorism. These kind of experiences are called traumatic. So trauma by itself is just an event, an experience that I have. Now, trauma can lead to different consequences. Some people may be not touched by it. Some people are touched by it, but to different extent and degrees. Some people may feel stressed and anxious and on alert for some period of time, and then that will decline and go away. Some people can become depressed. Some people can try to drink. Some people can have different. Now, a certain group of people develop what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. And I loved your question about the spectrum. Now here, PTSD is not a condition either you have it or not. It's not like an infection that you either have it or you don't have it. When I am trauma exposed, I can develop a range of symptoms from 0 to 100%. And in our science, to understand each other's language, we draw a line at 70% above, and we call it now post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what happens there is that basically the system goes to an intense fight and flight mode. It's good for a short period of time, but the problem is in PTSD, it stays there. I'm constantly on alert. I'm scared. I'm checking for danger automatically, even though I know maybe in this grocery store I'm safe. And I'm, let's say, a Navy SEAL who has the best chance of survival than anyone else in this grocery store if something bad happens. People have nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive memories, and all those experiences keep coming back to them, and they start becoming avoidant and not having a pleasant experience of life. Basically, the worldview becomes negative and ugly. I see it a lot in our first responders because, unfortunately, all they see is the worst of what humans do, and they start to feel like, well, doubt the humanity even to some extent. So what matters when we say somebody does have PTSD or not is whether these symptoms are causing a significant level of dysfunction. I'm not able to function. As I said, I'm a Navy SEAL, but I'm terrified of going to a restaurant. Or I can do it, but with tremendous level of distress. Then we call it PTSD.
Now, I want to touch on, you mentioned first responders, and when I finished my doctorate a few years ago, was on police officers specifically not seeking mental health treatment. And one of the police officers I interviewed said that, and this quote will always stick with me, everyone has a bad day, but police officers see everyone's bad day every day. And you think about that for a 20, 25, 30-year career, and what that does to an individual is just something that you and I certainly take for granted. And so I appreciate the work that you do with them, because they're not just there at the construction zone down the street where there's a street light out or there's pavement going on or things like that. Like, they are there at people's worst times. And so I just want to highlight that to our viewers and listeners that, buy them a cup of coffee when you see them at the local coffee shop or bakery or whatever. I know I do it, get them Jersey Mike's or something. And so it's those little things like that. Hopefully that may get you out of if you run a stop sign too. But I just want to highlight and thank you for the work that you do with X. It's extremely, extremely important.
No, I appreciate that. And that's very important, because like even I didn't know what is the life of a first responder before I started talking to them and working with them. For a lot of people, well, that police officer is an inconvenience who pulled you over. But in reality, 5 minutes before that, they might have been in a scene of a domestic violence, or had seen a dead person, or had seen horrible things. And as you said, day to day to day to day, and worse, it's in their living environments. Like, especially in a small town, the first responder, firefighter, police officer, even dispatchers may have to eat at a restaurant where they had to do CPR on someone.
Well, and I guess, and one last point on that, the dispatchers, the people don't think about, receiving those incoming 911 calls, they have the highest suicide rate of any first responder, because they don't know what the outcome is of those calls, because they don't have any closure of what's happening. They just get it and they pass it through to the police or the paramedic or whatever. So again, just for our viewers and listeners, thank your local first responder, buy them that cup of coffee or that bagel or donut, whatever, and it's the least we could possibly do. All right. And also I want to comment, hopefully you start out by saying that you're on a certain stress level here for your podcast. And so hopefully my producer, Eric, has written some good enough questions here where you're not too bored today. So I'm excited. We'll keep going with this. Good. That's a great answer, but I won't tell him you said that. Arash, obviously not all brains work the same way. What makes some brains more fearful, fear resistant, or fearless than others?
Very good question. This is one of the reasons we study fear, right? To understand what are the factors of vulnerability and resilience. It starts from our genes. We know some people have genes which makes them more prone to threat detection and threat appraisal and screening for danger. Some people inherently are more scared than others. Now, historically, maybe those who were more scared had a higher chance of surviving the adversities and kept their genes and transferred them. So there's a function to it. Then genes can also change, meaning that I have my genes, but not all of them are working. A lot of them are capped. Now the cap is removed and they become active. Life experiences can lead to changes in those genes activations and activities. And people who have had difficult experiences, whether during their childhood or the past, or even through their ancestors. There are people who have been exposed to war and to adversities and to catastrophe over centuries. Or like we have, as you mentioned, we work with refugees. We have had mothers who were war exposed and now they had their baby in the host country. Their baby's genetic composition may be different. And it makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint because the system evolved or grew in a difficult environment and needs to be more on alert than someone who was born in a safer environment. So that's part of it, the biology. Then goes back to my other experiences. If my childhood was rough, let's say a lot of people grew up in environments that, let's say, father was extremely angry, and they learn that there's chaos and they learn that they have to try to fix things as a child, and they learn that it is their fault, and they learn that it's like you're walking in a minefield and explosion can happen at any time. And when we are a child, we are developing an understanding of how safe the world is. That's how we learn, right? We learn a lot. You learn how to ride a bike, you also learn how scared you should be of things. And then we become more afraid. Let's say my boss says something a little bit that sounds unfriendly, and I may be a lot more terrified than someone else because immediately my brain goes to fight and flight mode. Let's say mom was always yelling and screaming. My wife looks angry, and instead of me hugging her and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" I may be terrified. And I always say, I have a chapter in the book, I'm afraid, so I'm angry. Anger is the other side. I get angry and I yell at her, and she yells at me, and that confirms my theory that the world is a dangerous place. Then trauma adds to that layer, right? When people who have had trauma experiences at some point in their life have a higher chance of developing PTSD if re-traumatized and having those experiences. And of course, the meanings that we and the world create for these experiences, how I see and perceive it. And at the end of the day, never two people experience the same traumatic event the same way. Like in research, we say, okay, all these 20 soldiers within the same area and an explosion happened, so they all had the same trauma. No, because one soldier could have been seeing what happened to his friend. One soldier could have not seen. One soldier just knocked out and lost consciousness. One soldier had trauma. One soldier had already lost a brother to a similar event. One soldier feels guilty that he didn't help his enough, or why is he alive and the friend is not alive. So there's so many different meanings that each of us and the world around us can create for those experiences that affects who gets or doesn't get impacted.
One last question before the break here. Excuse me. Is there a window of time that intervention can prevent trauma from becoming long-term post-traumatic stress? And if so, how does that work?
It's hard to tell if there is a window. We know in the immediate aftermath of trauma, safety and support is extremely important. If I regain a sense of control immediately, if I regain a sense of trust and feel safe, that helps reducing the chances of trauma. People have tried different medications in research right after the trauma. We still don't have very solid evidence that works. But the other thing that matters is that if somebody develops PTSD, the longer it goes, the worse it gets, because the brain starts shrinking. It's an active illness. The parts of the brain involved in emotional regulation shrink and get smaller and get weaker. And then I avoid, and the more I avoid, the more I avoid. And I start developing those perceptions of the world that keep ruminating and keep looping in my head. And of course, disability, life changes. So it gets harder and harder as the time goes by.
We've been talking to Dr. Arash Javanbakht. We'll be right back after a short break. Please stay with us. We are back. I'm Chris Meek, host of Next Steps Forward, and my special guest today is Dr. Arash Javanbakht. Dr. Javanbakht is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and nationally recognized expert on anxiety, trauma, and post-traumatic stress. He's a professor of psychiatry at Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit, and he serves as the director of the university's Stress, Trauma, and Anxiety Research Clinic. Dr. Javanbakhtt's clinical work focuses on treating civilians, refugees, first responders, and victims of torture and human trafficking experiencing post-traumatic stress and trauma-related disorders. He's also the author of the book, Afraid: Understanding the Purpose of Fear and Harnessing the Power of Anxiety. Doctor, before we start, I didn't ask this in the first half of the show, and I'll make sure we get this out there. Where can people find your book?
On Amazon. Yeah, Amazon is the easiest. It's also an audiobook with my own boring voice on Audible.
With your own voice. That's impressive. I love that. And again, the title of the book is Afraid: Understanding the Purpose of Fear and Harnessing the Power of Anxiety. So, Doctor, another area of your interest and research is modern anxiety. And I know that's a serious subject, but one area of modern anxiety is what I'd call, quote, manufactured or created anxiety. And that's the good old Hollywood product called the horror movie. First, is there a scientific term for the created or self-induced anxiety that comes with subjecting ourselves to a horror movie? And second, as an expert on fear, are you a horror movie fan? And if so, do you have a favorite horror movie, either as a researcher or a fan?
This is actually this was one of the most fun parts of the book when I was writing it. Haunt My Nerves is the title of that chapter. I am not aware if there's a term for that, desire, but yes, I love horror movies, and I can remember a couple of names. When I was a teenager, I saw Exorcist, and I was really terrified. My adult scariest movie is Hereditary. That also I found very scary. I mean, usually I find movies which are plausible to happen in your house more scary. Like zombie movies as a physician don't make much sense to me because first of all, you have to be in an apocalypse. Second, I still can't understand how a body can move without a pumping heart.
At a basic level, why are so many people drawn to horror movies? What's the appeal of being scared on purpose?
I have several theories about this. The first part is like any other primal important emotion, we get drawn to things that are related to those core parts of ourselves. One is love, for example, and romance movies are a lot, right? Same applies to fear. I also believe there is a component of, I look at it from, because a lot of things that the system does automatically is about survival. And watching horror movies and having these experiences is one way of learning how to survive. I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I'm watching a horror or dangerous movie, I am yelling at the actors, why are you going there? You should be doing this. If I were I would do this. This is how I would survive. Basically, vicariously, I am practicing safety. There's also a lot of overlap between the thrill and excitement parts of the brain and body and the fear parts of the body. In both conditions, you're very focused, you're hyper alert, your heart is pounding, you're breathing more heavily. So it's kind of like but we do it in a controlled environment. Like It's like you show an angry wolf on TV to your dog and your dog is barking and you're enjoying. The same you do to the animal inside. You know you're in charge, because there's a huge difference. And a big part is the context, right? If somebody is chasing me with something in their hand in a haunted house, my experience is different than if it is happening on the street. So you know the context is safe. So logically, you know it's safe, and but the illogical body doesn't get it. I mean, we even see it with technologies we're using, mixed reality. You know about that people see some digital human and they're terrified while they cognitively know this human is not real. It also has the possibility of bonding. We usually have these experiences done together, right? You can watch a documentary alone, but horror movies are more fun when you watch it with someone else. So these high emotions help with bonding together. These are also very mindful experiences. And we all know how helpful mindfulness is in reducing stress, anxiety. When I'm in watching that good horror movie, I'm not thinking about that email. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not. So we have 1 hour of respite from the more bothersome realities of life where we have less control. And finally, I think not only horror movies, but also other kind of these scary practices have the function of what I mentioned earlier when I'm standing on the edge of a cliff at the Grand Canyon. They put things in the context. After I've seen all those gore things in the movie, I come out and I look, oh, my life is good. My life is not that bad, because everything is understood in context and is interpreted in context.
I would envision horror movies being supportive of our mindfulness. So I appreciate you raising that. And I'm laughing at your point about you're screaming at the characters in the movie saying, why are you going there? Because there's a commercial on TV with these teenagers and they're like, look, there's a running car. Should we go there? And they say, no, let's go in the shed with all the running chainsaws in there. And then there's where the bad guy is. So I appreciate that. What's happening in or to the brain when someone watches a horror film when the viewer actually enjoys it or when they don't?
I would say so we said that we rile up the animal and we enjoy the ride. It's like you're riding a horse. The faster the horse rides, the more fun it is, until it's too fast, until you feel like you're losing control. And if the horse is going too slow, it's not going to be fun. You get bored. So I want that optimal window. Now, different horror movies are thrilling experiences, let's say roller coasters, may have different levels of that for different people. As I mentioned, when I am watching zombie movies, I don't understand how, as a physician, biologically this is possible. And I remember one of my friends told me, hey, you got to shut down your cognitive brain if you want to enjoy this movie. But exorcism, well, to parts of me, this could happen in my own house because there was no other thing needed for that movie to happen. So part is how realistic or how real that experience can feel and how much control we have. For example, when I sit on a roller coaster with my fear of heights, as soon as it starts, I have zero control in stopping it. That's more scary to me. It will probably be harder to watch a horror movie sitting in the dark if somebody takes the remote away from you and you cannot pause the movie. So a balance between realism, a sense of control, and the trust that I'm safe, all of that makes, and of course, we talked about biology. Some of us are more scared biologically. Some of us, for whatever interpretation of that experience we make, we are more or less afraid. Some of us might have heard stories about how roller coasters malfunctioned and a few people died, and now we have that memory. All of this together defines who will enjoy or be bored or be terrified of a certain experience. And that's why I recommend to people, you don't have to push yourself to do what someone else is doing. Do what you enjoy. You can push your limits a little bit, but not too much.
I like your concept of taking the remote control away. My oldest daughter, who's 23, she loves horror movies. And so next time she goes to watch them, I have to take the remote away and just have a little fun with her. So we talked about this earlier, talking about modern anxiety. How much of it is driven by the 24-hour news cycle and the nonstop social media, and how much it is simply the pressures of everyday life?
I would argue, I assume majority of your audience are in America. As an American, we are in one of the safest periods of history. right? We are not under constant bombing and attack. We are have some sort of safety net. We have fine healthcare system, although it's too expensive, but we can survive. So a lot of our baseline safety and survival needs are met. So realistically, we are safe, but the way things are portrayed to us, we are unsafe. And part, as we discussed earlier, is media, and part is social media. Because if my, especially for a lot of people who, unfortunately, specifically after the pandemic, became more disconnected from reality, which is friends and downtown and relationships and social activities, their only window to the world is their TV and their phone.
Hmm.
And these phones are extremely addictive because, I mean, when people are scrolling, they don't even know why they're scrolling. You have probably seen people put the phone down immediately, they pick it up, which means it's an automatic behavior, and then keep scrolling, and they don't even remember what they saw 10 seconds ago, but the emotional intensity of it is there. Now, there are people who are hooked to the cable news and they watch it for hours and hours. That becomes my reality. And I always say, if you have our brain is like a dog. If you feed your dog healthy food and good food and walk it, the dog is happy. If you feed garbage to your food, you will end up with to your dog, you will end up with a sick dog and diarrhea all over the place. Same applies to us. A lot of us are very scared because of exposure. Not that I'm saying there aren't bad things happening out there. There are a lot of bad things happening out there, but we have a skewed view of how bad the world is. We don't. I asked your viewers, listeners, how, when you listen to your media outlets, how much do you learn about the news in the world of sports, art, humanity, service, good things? Not much. So we have an unbalanced perception of our world, which is a scary place.
The title of your book, as I mentioned before, is Afraid, but you frame fear not as something to eliminate, but something to understand. What are our biggest misconceptions about fear, and what do you want people to understand about it?
I would say the biggest misconception is what you said earlier, that fear can be eliminated. It cannot. If I am not capable of experiencing fear, I'm ill and I have a higher chance of dying because I will not survive dangers, real dangers. So fear is it's not like an appendix that you can just pull it out and throw it away. Fear is always with us. The capacity to experience fear and anxiety is always with us. So that's why I say, rather than, and this is not something you can fight. You cannot fight part of you. You cannot fight your own arm. You cannot cut it out. So it's more about understanding why I'm afraid. What is scaring me? How realistic, how reasonable is this danger? And then adjusting that threat perception. Fear itself, like any other emotion, has energy, and as a very core emotion has a lot of energy. So now that energy can be exhausting us, which happens when we are anxious or trauma in other contexts, but it can also be used and utilized. I talk in the book about it. How can I trigger some level of anxiety to myself, in myself, about the next task I've been procrastinating, about the possibilities that I'm losing because of this? Because we do procrastinate out of fear. Sometimes we can use another fear to overcome this fear or adjust this fear. So it won't go away. It's just about how I can manage it, how I can reduce my exposures to things that I don't need and make me afraid. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people, were going back to the media, a lot of people say, oh no, I want to know. How can I, you want me to be ignorant? No, I don't want you to be ignorant. Know enough. That's hour two, three, four of the same cable news. Is it adding more information?
Hmm.
Is your more of fear and anger adding anything to your own well-being or that of someone else? Am I helping someone else by keep looking at those images and videos over and over and over? If not, then maybe I can grab that energy and go try to help someone whose life can change.
A premise of your book is that fear has a purpose. What is that purpose, and what is the potential benefit, and what is fear trying to do for or to us?
Fear is trying to keep us around. The whole purpose of fear in me is for me to survive. And as I said, it is old as the most primitive animals. I mean, people in research a rat's brain to understand how fear works in a human brain. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but there's so much commonality between the two. And it has the same purpose. I should exist before anything else. I should be safe before anything else. I should have all my four limbs on me before anything else. So that fear, let's say if a fast moving car, fast moving object is coming towards me, grabs me and pulls me out of the way before I can logically even think, what is this object? Okay, now it's a car. What kind of car is it? Why is this car coming so fast at me? Who's the driver? Why is the driver doing that? So fear does all of that work for us. It's kind of a watchdog. Fear is your dog, actually. That's a good example. But some dogs, I mean, I have Great Pyrenees dogs in my home. They're barking all the time at things that don't matter. That's the same story.
I'm waiting for my dog Zeke, my Shih Tzu, to let you know when the UPS guy is here. But I love your comment about how fear keeps us around. I'm thinking about a few weeks ago, I was at a local deli grabbing a sandwich, and the guy in front of me had a T-shirt on that said, "I'm pretty sure the last words I'm going to say are, 'Hold my beer and watch this.'" So I see that as very similar about the whole fear factor there.
Yeah.
The subtitle talks about harnessing the power of anxiety. What does that actually look like in real life?
So in real life, one part is that when I become friends with my fear system, and when I've leashed the dog, we can go for a pleasant walk together. It was very abstract. But first is that if I am not as scared of others the way I am now, I will be more able to function better, be more prosperous, and have better interactions with others. When I understand how my anxiety works inside me, especially in relationships, because it's very often too common, now I can manage those relationships better. If I understand how other people use my fears, now I won't give that energy to them. The energy is mine now. The energy is not to my TV or politics or tribe leader or social media or people around me. The energy comes back and I take ownership because now I know how fear works and I know how others manipulate fear and anxiety inside me. The other part is how can I when fear tells me something, my fear tells me, okay, this grant application is due in a month, you got to do this. This fear has some energy. Now I can let it lead to procrastination and that fear becomes more and more and more. I can remind myself and know that, okay, as soon as you move this energy into action, after this meeting, start working on that grant, the anxiety reduces, and it gives me that energy. Sometimes I can trigger that energy in myself. As I said, a lot of us are stuck in things which are not fulfilling. We are stuck in difficult relationships, difficult careers, difficult experiences that are not ours. Sometimes fear and anxiety is the pin in the wrong chair I'm sitting on. Now, how do I overcome that fear of, oh, if I leave this abusive relationship, I will be alone? I can remind myself of the lost possibilities that I could be right now, this very moment, in a better relationship. And I just live once and I'll be dead one day. And when I'm 80 some looking back, what will I feel about this life? That triggers another existential anxiety and fear, which energy I can use to move myself.
How can we rewire our fear responses? And what do we have to do to train our brains to respond differently to fear triggers?
So when there are specific fears, the first thing we want to do to fear is not deny it. If you deny it, it will get angrier. You got to assess it. Okay, I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? Because a lot of people avoid their anxieties or keep ruminating in them, right? One thing I say is that if this thinking is leading to a decision making, do it. If it is not, that's just like a unending loop of anxiety and rumination, right? So I assess and see, okay, is this anxiety relevant or not relevant? When it is relevant, then I can handle it judiciously. Okay, how dangerous is this situation? So now I combine the fear and logic together and function appropriately. Go back to your question. I forgot the question because I had another point about it.
What are some of the practical ways people can begin to work with their fear instead of against it?
Okay. And then there are times that I'm afraid of something that logically I know it's safe. The more I avoid, the worse it gets. Because this is how it works. The animal brain is telling me dogs are dangerous. I avoid the dog, nothing bad happens. The animal brain says, you see, I told you, if you avoid, you will be safe. So I go a couple of steps towards the dog. I freak out, nothing bad happens. Do it again, freak out, nothing bad happens. Do it again, freak out, nothing bad happens. And gradually, the system learns something new, that this is not dangerous. That's why I always say, as scary and as difficult as it looks, taking action always reduces anxiety, always helps with the reduction of these fears. And the more we avoid, the worse it will get. Sometimes it's not as easy as for me, terrified of dogs, walking towards a Great Pyrenees. So I need help of someone else to do that with me. These are the ways. So don't avoid them. Assess the realism and reality of how dangerous the situation is, and then move forward with that.
As we're coming to the end of our show today, how can we use our fears as a catalyst for purpose, growth, or even transformation? And what can and should someone do to conquer fears that have too much control over their lives?
A big part of it is about understand. So fear is helping me understand a lot of things about me. Unfortunately, there is no easy way. I basically track that fear alone or with the help of someone else and get to, okay, I'm afraid of my boss so much. How much of it is my dad? How much of my dad am I seeing here? And how much of my boss am I seeing here? So tracking basically and understanding what is in me that is reacting to these environments. That helps a lot with understanding how anxiety works inside of myself. That and there are ways like mindfulness practices. We did talk about mindfulness. I would even be happy to do a 1-minute practice with the audience here, because mindfulness is one of the ways that brings us to this very moment from the la land of anxiety, because anxiety is a lot of times a prediction of something going wrong, which most of the times doesn't happen. So mindfulness is not something that you only do when you're afraid. No, mindfulness is a practice you can do, and then it adds a tool in my toolbox, so I can be able to prevent it, be able to utilize it when I need those experiences. The other part is definitely gaining knowledge. If I'm afraid of something and I keep avoiding that situation, that only makes it worse. Study and research it. Like I had a patient who was afraid of sharks and wanted to go do surfing and really loved surfing. We started learning about that area, what kind of sharks are there, how far are they, which one of them are dangerous, which ones are not. And I can apply that to anything else in life. You're exploring some new career possibility and opportunity, and you're terrified. The more data you collect, the more you know and the more control you will have as a result of that. And we know very well, when I have control, I'm less scared.
Dr. Arash Javanbakht, Professor of Psychiatry at Wayne State University School of Medicine and Director of the Stress, Trauma, and Anxiety Research Clinic, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
No, the pleasure was mine. It was a real honor, and I learned a lot about fear and horror movies, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.